and regionally. Before I introduce today's presenters, please enjoy an opening message from today's sponsor, Procore.
What does it mean to move forward? To look past how things are and see what they could be. To see opportunities where others see risk. To see change as the only constant. To work through all the challenges we face. What does it mean to move forward? It means building a future we can all be proud of. A future where so much more is possible for so many more people. So yes, let's build it safer. Yes, let's build it faster. And yes, let's build it greener. But first, we have new ground to break. So let's build something new. Let's build something now. Let's build something that changes everything.
Wow, what an inspiring way to kick off the first webinar of the year. We're very excited to talk about the 2024 forecast and what it means to move forward in today's environment. We'll hear first from Alex Carrick, Chief Economist at Construct Connect. In 1985, Alex assumed the role of Chief Economist with Canadata, a product line of Construct Connect. During the last decade plus, he has delivered numerous presentations on the Canadian, United States, and world construction markets. Alex was promoted to Construct Connect's Chief Economist 7 years ago. Next, we'll hear from Ken Simonson, Chief Economist at Associated General Contractors of America, the leading trade or association for the construction industry. He has more than 40 years of experience analyzing, advocating, and communicating about economic and tax issues. Among his outside activities, Ken advises the Census Bureau on overhauling its construction data. Finally, we'll hear from Chad Chapman, Chief Estimator at Curry & Brown. In his role as director, Chad is the estimating service lead and a recognized industry expert in the delivery of cost estimates. During his 29 years in the construction industry, he has led cost consulting teams on projects and programs ranging in value from $100,000 to more than $60 billion across a wide range of sectors. And now I'd like to hand it over to our first presenter, Alex Carrick.
Thank you, Alisa. That's great. The first slide I've got is U.S. GDP numbers, and they're quite positive. I mean, certainly in the third and fourth quarter of last year, the growth rate was very strong. For the year, it was 2.5% as a whole. And I've got to say that this looks to me like the Federal Reserve has achieved what it wanted to achieve, which is a soft landing. We have a firm, Oxford Economics, that partners with us in our forecasting, and they are projecting that economic growth next year will be 2%. And that's right on the average annual growth rate since 2000. It's been 2%. The indicator that I look at in terms of possibly spotting a slowdown or a recession is the weekly initial jobless claims number. And there's no problem with it whatsoever. It's down around 200,000. If there was starting to be any indications of weakness, it would be up around 300,000 or above. This is just a slide that somewhat explains why the economy is so strong. There were the income supplements that helped at the beginning of the pandemic, and then they led to a big increase in consumer spending, which is reflected here in retail sales, which in turn caused the shortages, which led to inflation, which led to the Federal Reserve implementing the big interest rate increases. Now, inflation climbed to 9%, but it's back around 3%. And some of the set indices and the consumer price index are quite good. Like food at home is only 1.3% year over year. And the expectation is that the Fed will probably begin to lower interest rates in May, perhaps, as early as May of this year, and probably in 25 basis point increments, say every second meeting of the FOMC. Before leaving this, just one thing I should mention, there are two sure big events for the economy as a whole in 2024, and one of them is the interest rate decreases, and the other, of course, is the U.S. presidential election in November. So the decline in the interest rates and the anticipation of that has led to a bullish stock market. And in fact, the major indices are back near their all-time highs. These charts show the figures through the end of January, and I'll be updating them probably tomorrow for the end of, or those earlier ones were for the end of December, and I'll be updating them for the end of January tomorrow. So how have other prices been doing and so on? We're going to hear from two experts after me, and they'll certainly be talking about this. Material costs and bid prices in construction, they're kind of leveling off right now, but they have increased since the beginning of the pandemic by about a third. So really, the situation with prices and costs is that there is this leveling off or flattening out that's going on, but everything has moved to a higher level. And that's really the problem. Everything is much more expensive than it used to be. So on the bid price side and the material side, there have been those kind of increases. But what's been happening in terms of labor? Well, of course, the big news is the shortages in labor. And you can see from the JOLTS numbers that there's still a lot of openings for construction workers. But the hirings number remains quite low. Now, I'm going to pass the buck on to Ken and Chad as to why this might be, particularly given that construction workers have been doing fine on the wage front. Like their year-over-year earnings hourly and weekly are higher than the all jobs increases and higher than most other industry sectors. This is a chart showing the hourly rates, and this shows the weekly rates. So in terms of year-over-year increases for construction workers have been doing fine. And then there's the question about the premium that you pay for construction workers versus all jobs and versus manufacturers. And I really like the numbers and charts that Ken usually shows about that. So I'll leave that for when Ken makes his presentation. Now, in terms of just knowing what's going on in the country geographically, these are the numbers on Construct Connect's non-residential starts, the dollar volumes, last year. And Texas is just amazing. California still has a population that's about a third higher than Texas. California's population has been decreasing for 3 years in a row, and Texas has been increasing. Its latest gain was plus 1.5%. But in terms of construction activity, Texas had a dollar volume of non-residential construction started last year that was more than double California. And then the two tables beside it show the figures that make up that total non-res, being total non-res building and engineering. And again, Texas was way out ahead. And another major story about the construction industry has been mega projects. Now, in 2022, there was a huge number of billion-dollar projects. When I say huge, what I mean is a much bigger number of projects in 2022 than we had seen before. Over 30 projects that were of $1 billion or more each. And I didn't think that that kind of pace could possibly continue in 2023. But it did. There were 41 projects of $1 billion or more each last year. And the total, well, okay, never mind the total. Let's just think about the percentage of total non-res construction starts. In both years, mega projects, the 31 projects in 22 and the 41 in 23, accounted for 17% of the total. So that rather small number of projects was a very big part of the total. And in 2022, the mega projects were almost all manufacturing and industrial projects, like chip making plants and battery plants and new car plants and so on. And there was some of the same kind of work in 2023, but it became more diversified. It started to include things like electric transmission lines and pipelines and prisons. There were 2 mega project prisons in New York and in Alabama, and data centers. And how can it not be the case that there's going to be a continuing strong demand for data centers, given that we have virtual reality and artificial intelligence and cybersecurity issues and cryptocurrency and blockchain accounting that are all occurring now in the clouds. So in terms of our actual starts, the starts forecast that we make, there's 3 numbers here that I'll point out in particular. I talked about how strong industrial was in 2022, and you'll see that the increase was 229%. Now, in the Census Bureau's put in place investment numbers, manufacturing is now the biggest subcategory by quite a margin over second place roads. Okay, so in terms of grand total forecasts of dollar volume, we've got a decent increase in 2024, plus 4.5%, and again in 2025, plus 7.2%. And the way I always like to talk about the forecasts is in terms of charts. And so my final 5 slides are all about the subcategories of construction. So I'll try to run through these pretty quickly. And in terms of residential, well, during the pandemic, the emphasis was on multi-unit structures, and they may have become overbuilt, particularly since people are saying that rents have flattened out. Although in the CPI, rents are still plus 6.5% year over year. But going forward, it's more likely to be single-family construction in line with the interest rate decreases. In terms of road work, the Texas again has a huge road work program underway, and the feds are going to have to figure out what they're going to do to finance road work, because if everybody starts driving EVs, they're not going to be collecting the same money from the gas tax. In shopping, in the shopping sector, retail sector, the retail consultants talk about the changeover to hybrid work by almost all of us. And that means that there's going to be a lot more local retail buying. So that's something to think about. Now, non-store retail is now 20% of total retail. So warehouse construction, it went gangbusters through the pandemic. and to the point where it was excessive, and it's come down. But because of that hybrid work situation and shopping online, it's going to pick up at some point as well. In office building construction, it's being supported by the data centers that I talked about. But there's an interesting thing going on there too, and that's how property developers or office building developers with the high vacancy rates, they're fixated on maintaining their property values to keep their share prices up. And that's a little bit risky. So when you see an office building project being sold, it might involve something that's being called seller financing to make sure those projects get ahead and property values stay strong. Amusement and transportation construction starts, they have a sawtooth pattern, and that's mainly because of ultra-large projects that got into the data. For example, in stadium work, there were the big NFL stadiums that went ahead between 2014 and 2019. And in transportation, there's just all kinds of big airport projects that have already occurred and that are in our upcoming large projects lists. And also there's all kinds of rapid transit projects that are being proposed. In industrial, I talked about that before. Water and sewage, I find this interesting because it looks like it has shifted up to a higher plane. And that's because with these mega projects, the owners want to protect them. They want to have better storm sewer network systems and so on. And so the people in this industry are recognizing that there's a benefit to them from all these really big projects. In terms of education, well, U.S. population is growing at 0.5% per year. Some states are growing considerably faster. The illegal immigration is about 1 million per year, and that helps to support at the younger grade levels. In terms of higher education, well, the strength in the stock market helps endowment funds, and there's all these jobs in new categories like logistics and the metaverse and so on that are going to need academic institutions to train the staff that will be streaming into those jobs. In hospital work, there's no question that there's going to be a need because it's the baby boomers are growing older, but you have to consider that there's about 4 or 5 categories of ownership here. There's the public sector and the private sector, and then religious hospitals and academic hospitals, teaching hospitals, and so on. So it's a matter of where they're going to get their funding from. Electric power is fascinating because the whole thing about moving to a more sustainable world really is dependent on a lot greater capacity in the electricity, in terms of electricity supply. And even renewables, there's even categories of renewables that need electricity. If you're going to produce hydrogen, for example, you want renewable electricity for electrolysis to separate the hydrogen atoms from the oxygen atoms. And even LNG facilities, because fossil fuel work hasn't gone away, and it's not going to go away. The U.S. is now the biggest producer in the world of oil. And there's some of the LNG producers are talking about trying to use electricity to cool down gas into its liquid state. Anyway, so this is all in terms of all other civil. That's railroads, and that's bright line work. There's an east project that's being completed and a west project that's in the system, and there's all kinds of more railroad projects out there. And you can see that the engineering and the grand total starts, I'm quite optimistic about where we're going with total construction activity. Anyway, I'm turning it over to Ken now. So, Ken, take it away.
All right. Well, thanks, Alex. I must say you're a lot braver than I am in providing such specific and long range estimates for each of those categories. I will be covering some of the same material, but with a somewhat different perspective. Let me start again with the employment picture, and then I'll move into what's going on with materials cost and availability, and wrap up with my outlook for where construction spending will happen in 2024. This first slide shows that non-residential construction employment, that's employment at general contractors, especially trade contractors on the non-residential side, and heavy and civil engineering firms. That red line shows that growth in non-residential construction employment has been running at quite a strong 3 to 4% rate for the past full year. These are year over year changes. So the industry is attracting more employees. It is bringing on more employees than is shown by the total non-farm employment change, a 1.7% increase over the past year, and certainly more than residential construction, though it's been a bit of a surprise to me that residential construction has remained positive. I think that's a sign that contractors have really struggled to finish off multifamily projects, that we're still at a near record number of multifamily units under construction. Though I do think that's going to change a lot in 2024, and I'll get to that shortly. The employment picture is positive across the country. About 2/3 of the states had an increase in construction employment last year. This number has actually dwindled somewhat over the course of the year. At one point, this map showed 45 states had a year-over-year increase. Nevertheless, it is pretty positive, and I wouldn't say that there's a concentration of job losses in any particular area. But many of these states would be doing even better if they could, if companies were able to find enough workers. And Alex mentioned my chart on job openings and labor turnover. Specifically, what I do here is look at job openings. In this case, at the end of December, we got these figures yesterday morning. End of December each year. This is a November one. The December slide looks very similar in that the job openings are now running well ahead of the total number of people hired, whether it was in November shown here or December. So the implication is the industry actually wanted to bring on twice as many workers as it was able to hire. So even though hiring is running at a rate of over 200,000 a month and total employment is going up, nevertheless, it's not going up nearly as fast as the industry wants. Why? Well, the unemployment rate in construction, which used to run a good deal higher than it did in the overall economy, particularly in cold weather months, such as this slide showing the December rate each year, that rate has nearly converged. It's down to just 4.4% in December of 2023, which was the lowest unemployment rate ever for December. And so there just aren't many workers who have construction experience, did not work for pay in December, but were actively looking. That's the definition of an industry unemployment rate. Well, the industry has been trying to get workers back. It's raising pay at a greater rate than is the total private sector. But the gap, that premium that Alex mentioned, measured by a series with a complicated name, Average Hourly Earnings for Production and Non-Supervisory Employees. To boil it down, that would be average wages for craft workers and office workers who aren't supervisors, compared to the average for production workers in the total private sector. From 2000 to 2019, that premium averaged 21.5%. When the pandemic hit and we were cooped up at home, ordering food to be prepared at home or delivered, or meals delivered, or other goods coming from a warehouse instead of our going into stores, warehouses and delivery companies and restaurants boosted their pay from often minimum wage to maybe double that. And so the premium shrank very sharply at the beginning of the pandemic, as shown by the drop off in that red line. It's come back, you can see in the box at the lower right, Average hourly earnings in construction went up by more than 5% last year, compared to 4.3% in the overall private sector. But the premium is still well below that 21.5% average. And I think it's going to have to go even higher, as contractors now are at more of a disadvantage compared to jobs that can be done remotely or on a hybrid basis or with flexible hours, things that are still not possible for on-site construction jobs. So I'm expecting that wages will continue rising by this measure anywhere from 5 to 7% this year. Looking at this chart, we can see that that 5% year-over-year increase in average hourly earnings has been in place ever since 2022. So the industry has not had the tapering off of wage increases that other sectors have experienced. And indeed, as I just said, I think it may go even higher this year. What about materials costs? Well, they've certainly been on a mountain and valley picture. The first valley hit in the beginning of the pandemic in early 2020, when the economy shut down so much, the materials cost actually dropped for a couple of months. But then that year-over-year change really turned around as we saw record prices for lumber, steel, and copper, and much more frequent and steeper price increases than we had had in the past for things like concrete, gypsum, and insulation products, and plastic pipes. In fact, for 12 straight months, the input price, the producer price index for inputs to new non-residential construction, which is a weighted average of all of the materials and some services such as design and trucking services used in non-residential construction, went up 20% or more. The last peak happened in the spring of 2022 after Russia invaded Ukraine. Now, fortunately, since June of 2022, prices have been decelerating, or actually for a while last year, they fell below where they had been in the same month of 2022. But you can see at the very end of this chart that they have started creeping up again. The latest 12-month increase from December 2022 to December 2023, 1.8%. And the cumulative increase since February of 2020, just before the pandemic, 37%. So double what most people think of as inflation, the consumer price increase of 19%, as shown by that orange line. So while the Federal Open Market Committee does seem to think that inflation is coming down at the proper rate, we just got a report a few minutes ago that they're holding steady on their interest rate target for now. Inflation is still present in construction to a greater degree. Well, it's also present for specific materials. It used to be that cement or ready-mix concrete prices would go up once a year, maybe in January, maybe in April, with a long lead time, and then sometimes the prices would erode over the course of the year. Not so anymore. For 3 years in a row now, we've seen monthly increases in the producer price index for cement products overall. Not always for ready-mix, sometimes it's for pre-stressed or precast or pipe, but at any rate, you can see that in the latest 12 months, both cement and ready-mix went up 8%, even while that total input price index was going up less than 2%. Other things are very volatile in both directions. Lately, we've seen diesel prices come way down, but just a few months ago, they posted a huge 1-month increase. And similarly with subcontractors, quite a range of price changes over the last year. In fact, we see that contractors have had a lot of trouble aligning their bids with their cost increases. This picture shows the year-over-year change in that input price index that I was just showing you, minus the year-over-year change in bid prices as collected by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And the periods in red are when contractors were really suffering because the bid prices were falling so far short of the increase in materials costs. That reversed from mid-2022, as I told you, up until almost the end of 2023. But if your eyes are sharp, you can see a little bit of red peeking out for that December 2022 to 2023 period. I'm not forecasting what the bid's going to be in the next year. It's not a good thing for the Construction Trade Association to get into. But the takeaway from this slide is that it's very hard to keep up with changes in materials costs. Shouldn't expect contractors to reduce their prices the minute they see a price break on one or another material, particularly if they're actually buying one like concrete that hasn't gone down. And also, I think we're at the end of the price relief on most materials. We could see prices going up 4 to 6% for materials this year, and as I said, 5 to 7% for production labor costs. Now, switching to construction spending, Alex touched on this, and then he switched to their proprietary information on the value of construction starts. I look at what the Census Bureau puts out. As he mentioned, tomorrow morning we'll get the preliminary estimate for December and for the full year of 2023. For now, this shows the year-over-year change in spending put in place, that is, spending on projects already underway. Census does a snapshot each month based mainly on reports from contractors as well as some imputations. Construct Connect puts in the whole value of a project the month they deem it to have started. So their series is more volatile. They're both valid ways of looking at what's going on. At any rate, the census numbers, they're what we consider a coincident indicator. They go directly into that gross domestic product report that we heard so positive for the fourth quarter, which Alex showed at the beginning of his presentation. And what this shows is that every category is defined by the Census Bureau had positive change from November of 2022 to November of 2023. Now, unfortunately, neither these numbers nor the Construct Connect figures are adjusted for inflation. So we are left wondering how much of the increase is actual new units versus just a change in price. But overall, it's certainly a very positive picture. The Census Bureau actually puts out numbers for 160 some categories of non-residential construction on its website, census.gov/construction spending. And here I've taken some of those subcategories and listed them along with putting both the full categories and the subcategories in descending order of November 2023 size. And you can see that even at the subcategory level, most things were positive over the last 12 months. Rather than going through this in any detail, I want to get to the expectations going forward. And let me start with what contractors themselves have told us. AGC, as you probably know, the leading construction trade association with over 27,000 member companies. Each November, we ask them to provide us an estimate or their own expectation as to whether projects available to bid on, the dollar value of those, will increase or decrease in the coming year. So this chart shows the difference between the percent who say they'll increase minus the percent who say that there will be a decrease. And we call that the net reading. And for all of the infrastructure categories, the net reading is very positive. Water and sewer up a positive differential of 32 percentage points. Transportation, meaning transit and rail and airport, bridge and highway projects, both up 30 percentage points. Federal, more positive than negative, 29 percentage points for projects for the General Services Administration, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, NAVFAC, and other federal agencies. Power also very positive, 25 percentage points more respondents think the market will grow than shrink. Keep in mind, these are not percentage growth of the market, but the differential between the optimists and the pessimists. Again, very positive for both hospital and other kinds of healthcare. Data centers, a little less positive, and I'm surprised it isn't even more positive than it is. And then both K through 12 schools and public buildings, higher education, all getting moderately positive readings along with manufacturing. Less so warehouse, multifamily residential, but they're still in the green. The only negatives for lodging, retail, and private office. Now, contractors are also optimists. They wouldn't be in the business if they weren't. 69% of them think that their own headcount will increase, even though they do say, majority say that it will continue to be hard or become even harder to hire than it was in 2023, which, as I showed, definitely didn't meet their hiring goals. My own expectation is that the economic recovery will continue, even though there's certainly plenty of risks out there. I think single family home building has hit bottom and it's going to continue the recovery that's already started. But with mortgage rates still remaining much higher than they were a couple of years ago, house prices remaining very high, the recovery will be modest. On the other side, developer finance categories are facing still quite high interest rates, very conservative lending by banks, very difficult to get credit. They have to put much more down. And also weakening rents for whether it's multifamily, warehouse, retail kind of iffy, office very negative, lodging also kind of iffy. So I do expect a slowdown in developer financed or income producing or commercial properties, depending how you define commercial. But that's going to be outweighed by very strong continuing growth in data centers, manufacturing plants, and hopefully at last getting a lot of that money from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. In our survey, most contractors said no, they still hadn't seen projects awarded under that. They may have bid on them, but not many had even had a chance to do that. I'm hoping that that number will finally increase in 2024, but there are still regulatory hurdles and uncertainties. That's true also for the CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot of money out there, but the timing of when it will hit, very uncertain. Going for the longer term, finding workers will be a challenge for contractors for the indefinite future. In fact, the pandemic has made it harder, not just for the reason I mentioned of more flexibility on jobs, but because as the workforce ages, people tend to age out of construction jobs earlier than they do other ones. So the industry is even more challenged than other sectors. Slower population growth also means that there will be gradually slower growth for housing, for the associated streets and schools and public safety buildings. And then there are a number of other ways that demand is going to change. But overall, I do think construction will continue to grow next year and beyond. Where is it going to happen? Well, my crystal ball clouds over, but I do tend to think that the colors in this map are going to remain fairly certain, fairly stable. That is, the strongest growth in the Southeast, in Texas, in the Intermountain West, as people move from the Northeast and the Midwest to the South and Texas, and from the West Coast to the Western Mountain States, and really all across the country. So I'll leave it there, but be glad to send people the updated version of my slides after I put in the new spending and employment figures tomorrow and Friday, and add you to the email list for the Data Digest, my weekly summary of economic news relevant to construction. And now let me turn things over to Chad.
Thanks, Ken. That's a tough act to follow. I'm just going to dwell for a minute on this slide just to give some context. I spent about the last 20 years running an estimating team, mostly providing cost estimates for owners. In 2023, we estimated over $45 billion in projects, mostly driven by those mega projects in the tech sector. And our role is really to help owners understand their costs, set realistic budgets, and try to ensure they pay fair market value. So our research, it goes beyond just union agreements or industry standard data, I suppose. It incorporates data from real projects, bids from contractors at all levels. So our graphs consist largely of data we're exposed to in our day job, but you'll see very similar messaging to what Alex and Ken have already shared. I know forecasting escalation and inflation isn't easy, especially in the last 5 years, unless, of course, you have one of those magic 8 balls. So we use the recent past as an indicator to try to forecast escalation, and we continue to hone our formula to become more precise. And we're currently projecting material cost increases to be more in line with historic inflation, but labor and things like supervision and design are where the biggest inflation escalation risks are. And of course, as you just mentioned, certain markets that are really hot, certain trades, and certain project types are at a higher risk for escalation. I'll finally just touch on a few methods of advice we give to clients to help mitigate some of these uncertainties. So, this is just a historic material trends based on varying materials that are prominent in construction. This is essentially the increases we've seen in these from the beginning of the pandemic, and the sharp increases have largely slowed since in 2023. This graph shows material cost changes last year only. Overall, the costs have plateaued. Concrete did experience the greatest increase, and we believe that it's because it's commonly available material with a lower embodied carbon. So we believe that's part of what's driving this. Just looking at lead times, this is something that we track on a lot of different projects for our clients, and lead times have really stabilized coming into 2023. And this is for most materials and commonly sized MEP equipment. It continued throughout 2023 with even showing some improvements noted pretty much across the board comparing to the same thing in 2022, which I think we all could probably agree we hear less and less about supply chain issues than we did maybe a year ago. Now, jumping into trade labor costs, the recent history is kind of leading us to predict this will be the biggest escalation risk in the coming years. Skilled journeyman apprentice numbers have fallen to record lows, and as the construction activity remains strong, the competition um, gives unions more bargaining power, causing project teams to fight to try to keep the limited resources on their projects with incentives, bonuses. So part of, being a good owner is figuring out how to be the owner of choice. That's where everyone will want to work. So this just shows the nationwide average increases in rates bid on projects. Um, the bid numbers don't always match necessarily what, say, like for example, on skilled labor rates, we'll oftentimes see bid rates come in higher than what the union or prevailing wage rates suggest. And just briefly, it's not necessarily limited to just labor only, but there's we're also seeing escalation be caused by issues with project management and execution due to inexperienced leadership and staffing teams, as well as I mentioned, things like supervision, design, engineering. So these trade labor trends in the last 12 months, these are the annual increases. They've been even higher. We expect to see these types of increases again in 2024. This shows the nationwide averages by trade from data we gather from our projects. And there are busier markets, Austin, Texas being one of those that you touched on, can experience even higher increases. So A major consideration in forecasting labor costs is the impacts of market saturation or market activity. If there's a mega project nearby, owners can expect to pay even more than our forecasts. So this is just kind of a reiteration of what we're seeing. Normalizing escalation in the 3 to 6% range for most markets in the US, and it's really being driven by labor and not necessarily materials. Based on labor rates, material costs, and contractor markups, overhead profit, economic indicators, this is a graph showing our historic escalation and our prediction for 2024. This is national average, and it's for typical non-residential projects. It's a busy slide, but just wanted to reiterate that escalation can really vary dramatically based on market or location. So this graph again shows cities at the right where we're expecting it to be at the high end of our range, and these are those hot markets: Phoenix, Austin, Columbus, Boise. And they're all homes to a lot of high tech manufacturing activity in the construction market. And really, this is where we see the most labor incentives where owners are paying over scale. And then cities on the left are expected to fall towards the lower end of our range. Positive trends, costs always go up on everything, but excuse me, again, we're seeing them gradually kind of come back down to where they have historically been. Lead times are improving for most common materials and for typically sized equipment. Just want to reiterate the labor, supervision, design, and engineering are the key escalation drivers in 2024. And this just shows annual labor escalation. We're projecting 2024 increases to be slightly higher than 2023. And as sustainability and carbon reduction become law, we can see low carbon materials experience greater inflation as the demand increases for these. Another consideration, excuse me, this year is whether pre-purchasing materials or equipment makes sense based on cash flow. Financing costs are at recent highs, so this time last year we were suggesting buying out your materials and major equipment as soon as possible as your design supported that. With interest rates where they currently are, it's not always the best advice. So, some suggestions that we provide to owners on how to mitigate the risks affiliated with escalation are, I think the biggest one is sort of at the bottom here and highlighted, it's competition. Um, you know, we had two projects for the same client and very close to one another, and one of them was honestly done with a competitive bid, and the other was done with a negotiated procurement method. The project that was negotiated with sole source, they come back to us time and time again for escalation advice, verification, and value engineering. And the competitively bid project has not had the same issues. One of the ways to make sure you get competition is to do community outreach. Planning is key, right? So again, becoming that owner of choice. So I kind of touched on it, but the old axiom of measure twice and cut once, it's just the simple translation to me is just have a process and a plan and stick to it. The owner who invests in planning consistently absolutely pays less for their project and often realize tremendous return on investment. Their savings they achieve well outweigh the fees or costs that they pay to have people help them plan the projects. And for those who manage projects outside of the US, escalation certainly looks different around the globe. Our colleagues around the world, we are a global firm, and so we have departments in all of our locations that do similar research. Um, there's some pretty wild inflation and escalation calculations, or historic for last year that we saw, zeroing in on Central and South America. Mexico and Peru struggled with high inflation in 2022 through 2023, sorry. Um, and we're now expecting that trend to reverse this year. Colombia, conversely, is projected to have high escalation due to competition for material and labor. I'll now pass it back over to Elisa.
Thank you all. Great information you've shared with us today. Before we have our presenters address your questions, I'd like to remind you that we love your feedback. Please take a few moments to complete our webinar survey, which you will see on your screen now, or can be completed through the survey widget on your console. And now for the first question. Do you think usage of AI in construction will have an impact on growth in the industry in 2024 and beyond? Ken, can you start us off on that?
It's certainly having an impact on discussion groups and meetings. I was at one yesterday morning where there was a very extensive discussion of both the advantages and the pitfalls affecting the writing of contracts and relations with other stakeholders and so forth. I think it's very much in a learning phase for companies as to how they can use it, but also what they have to be aware of. So in terms of measuring actual change in construction spending or methods, I think it's a story for a few years later, and I expect to read a lot about it in the ENR.
Great. Does anyone else want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I will.
Okay, well,
I think sorry,
no, go
I'll
ahead.
jump in quick. I think just from our perspective, maybe something not intended in the question, but we see some clients who are racing to build new projects to, be a leader in the AI space. So that does have an impact certainly on the construction industry where they need contractors to build these facilities.
Great, thank you. Alex?
Well, yeah, my answer would be first of all, I'm not even that sure what AI is, but I have no doubt that it's going to eventually have an impact on the industry, just like everything else. Like, there's been so many technological changes over the last 20 years that have affected the economy and construction. And AI certainly, it's going to be a big factor in it as well. And writing of contracts, yeah, I like that as one thing. I would expect that it will particularly play a role in logistics because that's where the industry has had a lot of trouble. We went through a period of supply shortages, and all that stuff is an iteration. It's about iterations to find better ways to access materials and to time it. Just-in-time inventory will be changed very much by AI, I would expect.
Thank you. What do you see as a way to recruit